So like Manny mentioned, today we're coming to a passage in Genesis 13 and 14 about Abraham and his nephew Lot. So in Genesis 13, we see that Abraham and Lot are really good businessmen, right? They're in the business of shepherding. They have lots of shepherds and lots of animals to be shepherded. And in Genesis 13, it says actually they had flocks and herds and tents. So actually, it turns out they had become such good businessmen. They had amassed so many animals and possessions that in Genesis 13:7, it tells us there's some fighting, some strife between the herdsmen of Abraham's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. Not optimal, right? So, so Abraham, he's the head honcho here. He could have just told Lot, "Hey, get your shepherds in line." But actually, in verse 9 of Genesis 13, he says to Lot, "Is not the whole land before you? Please separate yourself from me. If you go to the left, then I will go to the right. Or if you go to the right, then I will go to the left." What Abraham is saying here, he's basically saying, Lot, check out this whole land. Right? Look at the entire land before you. We're getting too big. I don't want any strife between you and me and our shepherds. So, look across this whole land and you pick a spot for yourself. We can separate. You go one way and I'll go the other. So, Lot's a smart guy. He's a good businessman. He says, good idea, Abraham. So maybe he was thinking it was time to separate from Abraham and spread his wings a little, run his own camp. So what does Lot do? In Genesis 13:10, it says, "And Lot lifted up his eyes and saw the entire plain of the Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, like the garden of Jehovah." Sounds pretty good, huh? Probably could raise some cattle there, right? So Lot says, "Great idea, Abraham. I'm choosing this one." And Abraham says, "Okay." So as we go on in Genesis, and Stephen will touch on this in a bit, what we see is that Lot suffers a lot. He suffers defeats in battles. He gets captured. He ends up living in Sodom, which was this wicked place in the sight of Jehovah. You could say these were all clear failures that Lot suffered. But actually, Lot's first failure came before all that. Lot's first failure came in Genesis 13:11, right after he lifted up his eyes and saw the plain of Jordan. And I'm going to share my screen here. This verse, Genesis 13:11, and I'd like for us to pay attention to the first 5 words here. So Lot chose for himself. Let that sink in for a second. So Lot chose for himself. Right? He didn't choose for the capital M, me, right? But the lowercase m, me. Lot took the path of the self, and he chose for himself. And so Lot chose for himself the entire plain of the Jordan, and he separated from Abraham and journeyed east toward his beautiful parcel of land. Right? Let me stop share real quick. And so it's good that Lot made a logical decision. Right? You could say he was planning for his future. He made the best business decision, the best choice for his career. But in doing so, Lot left the people of God. Right? In choosing for himself, Lot left the people of God. You know who the people of God were on the earth at that time? It was Abraham. Abraham's wife, Sarah. And in choosing the best choice for his career and his future, being practical, not bad being practical, be practical, but in doing so, Lot left the people of God. And as the record shows, this turned out to be a pretty bad decision. It was a failure that bred more failures. And so let me tell you what Lot's decision should have been. Instead of choosing for himself, he should have said, Abraham, wherever you are, that's where I want to be. Right? If we need to fire all the shepherds and get new shepherds, right? We'll get new shepherds, Abraham. Abraham, you are my choice. I don't want anything to separate me from the people of God. And that's what Lot should have said, right? So what happens then when they separate? So here I'm going to share my screen. So what happens, right? So Genesis 13:12 through 13. Lauren, would you be able to read these 2 verses for me?
Sure. 12. Abram dwelt in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelt in the cities of the plain and moved his tent as far as Sodom. 13. Now the men of Sodom were very wicked and sinful towards Jehovah.
right? So when we read this last part of verse 13, right, there should be sirens and alarm bells going off in our head. Wicked and sinful toward Jehovah. That can't be. So now it says, right, Lot moved his tent as far as Sodom. Right, he's not in Sodom, but he's in the direction of Sodom, in that vicinity. So you could say maybe it's not in Sodom, but it was towards Sodom, and clearly Lot is not on a good path here. Lot made his choice, right? Moved himself, his family, his possessions towards Sodom. And then in the remaining verses of Genesis 13, we see something very different, right? In Genesis 13, 14 through 17, we see that Jehovah comes to Abraham. And the kind of a lot. So I wonder if maybe Anita and Emily could read verses 14 and 15, and then let's have Phoebe read 16 and 17. Is that okay?
And Jehovah said to Abram after Lot had separated from him, "Now lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward."
15. For all the land that you see, I will give to you, and to your seed forever.
I will make your seed as the dust of the earth, so that if a man can number the dust of the earth, then your seed can also be numbered. 17. Rise up, walk through the land according to its length and its breadth, for I will give it to you.
So here, right, Jehovah comes to Abraham and he says, Abraham, you gave Lot a choice, but I come and I give you no choice. Right? That's effectively what's happening here. You don't get what's left over, you get everything. Right? Abraham, I want you to look north, south, east, west, right? Everything you see, I'm giving that to you. I give you no choice, Abraham. I just give you everything. Right? And so we take the path of the self. We may get something, kind of like Lot. But eventually we take God and God says, I give you everything. Right? So what happens there? God renews his promise to Abraham. He says, you'll bear a seed. You'll be given the land. And Abraham responds immediately by offering himself completely and utterly and absolutely again. And verse 18 says, Abraham built an altar near the oaks of Mamre, meaning strength. There in Hebron, meaning fellowship. Right? So you think Abraham was being strengthened, right? And enjoying fellowship? I certainly believe he was. Right? It was as if Abraham was declaring, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Right? So we see this progression here in Genesis 13. And this really applies actually to our life as Christians, right? As Christians, we have two choices. We can have our best life now, right? Or we can have God's presence, promise, and purpose. We can have the American dream and all that it might promise and give to us, or we can have the imminent presence of God, the unshakable promise of God, and the eternal purpose of God, all within the context, right, of the people of God. So we have two choices. And here, one more slide here. Could I get Jasper to read Hebrews 10:25, and then Sean, do you mind reading 2 Timothy 2:22 after that?
Hebrews 10:25. Not abandoning our own assembling together, as the custom with some is, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day drawing near.
2 Timothy 2:22. But flee youthful lusts and pursue righteousness, faith, love, peace with those who call on the Lord out of a pure heart. Thank
you. Yeah, so Hebrews 10:25 here, not abandoning our own assembling together. You know what that sounds like? Sounds like don't separate yourself from the people of God, right? What should we do? 2 Timothy 2, right here. What should we do? Flee youthful lusts. Pursue righteousness, faith, love, peace. With who? With those who call on the Lord out of a pure heart. With God's people. So I graduated from Northwestern not too long ago. And, like Manny mentioned, I'm now downtown here at the medical school. And I know what a pressure cooker college in Evanston or in Hyde Park can be. And it seems as if the world sets before each of us a ladder, right? And dangles the word success as a carrot at the top. And like the high-achieving students we are, where we might be, we start climbing. And from experience, I can tell you there's no lasting satisfaction in that kind of rat race, right? Wrong after wrong, midterm after midterm, internship after internship, we get stuck on this ladder. Before you know it, you're so high up that you've lost sight of the ground that keeps you stable and grounded. So now I'm not saying we shouldn't succeed or, what I am saying is don't separate yourself from the people of God, from the presence, the promise, the purpose of God. And so remember those two choices Lot had, which are the same two choices that we have. Do I separate myself from Abraham to have my own land and jumpstart my career, or do I stay with the people of God? Do I take this prestigious internship that makes me big money, but has me working 80 hours a week and prevents me from pursuing with those, right? Or do I stay with the people of God? And so in medical school, right, this is the decision I face almost daily, right? And I'm sure for you, this is the same. It might not be easy, but I'm thankful that the Lord gives us these, opportunities. These decisions might be difficult, but they're opportunities to learn, to look away unto Jesus, right, the author and perfecter of our faith, to realize that the purpose, right, the promise, the purpose, and the person of God and the people of God are just much, much better than anything this world can offer. So I think I'll turn it over to Stephen now.
Thank you very much, James. I'd like to just start off back in Genesis again, kind of at the transition between chapters 13 and 14, where James left off. And so let's have a look at these verses here. James already covered these with us. And we saw that after Lot made his choice, he moved his tent as far as Sodom, right? So he's not living in Sodom, but he's, just kind of in the general vicinity of Sodom. And then at the end of going into Genesis 14, 14 kind of starts off with this very wild, entertaining piece of Gentile history. And so what happens in 14, to make a long story short, is that these Gentile kings, they go to war with one another. And so it's a group of 4 kings against another group of 5. And among the group of 5 kings is the king of Sodom, where Lot is. So the 4 kings, they go and they attack Sodom. And when they attack Sodom, they capture Lot. And so coming to Genesis 14:12, after this happens, what we see here is, and they took Lot, Abram's brother's son, and his possessions and departed, for he was dwelling in the vicinity of Sodom, as far as Sodom? No, right? He was dwelling in Sodom. So in the beginning, he was just dwelling in the general vicinity of Sodom. And now he wasn't just dwelling as far as Sodom, but dwelling in Sodom. And do you think God will allow his people to live in Sodom? No, right? Absolutely not. By his sovereignty, God arranges circumstances to wake his people up. And so what we see is this is really a strong cautionary word to us, right? Because this is really a big part of Satan's strategy against us as believers. His strategy is not necessarily just to knock us out of the Christian race all in one go, but he works in a subtle way, bringing us little by little away from the people of God, first towards Sodom, and then little by little into Sodom. And so to really reiterate the point that James shared with us earlier, the deciding factor for all of our decisions in life is this: how will this affect my relationship with God and my proximity to the people of God? I'll repeat that again. When we make any decision, we need to ask ourselves, how will this affect my relationship with God and my proximity to the people of God? Because through all of the decisions that we face in life, Satan has a goal. He has an aim to lure us, to degrade our relationship with God, and to lure us further and further away from the people of God. So we really need to make every decision in our life, big and small, with this in view, right? And so we see that Lot's situation was not very positive. He drifted further and further until eventually he was dwelling in Sodom, right? But thankfully, that's not where the story ends. There's good news. Moving forward, we see that Abram heard that his brother had been taken captive, and he led out his trained men, born in his house, 318 of them, and he pursued, right? He pursued as far as Dan, right? The people who had captured Lot. And he divided his forces against them by night, he and his servants, and struck them and pursued them to Hobah, which is north of Damascus. And he brought back all the possessions and also brought back Lot, his brother, and his possessions, as well as the women and the people. Thank goodness for Abraham, right? And so these verses show us Abraham's attitude, his response. He hears that Lot's been captured. And what is his response? His response is, let's go. Let's go rescue Lot. And what did Abraham not do? Well, I don't know about you, but if I'd been in Abraham's shoes, I probably would have thought, well, serves you right, Lot. Told you so. You know, yeah, you're in a pickle, but kind of sounds like a personal problem to me. But Abraham did not do this, right? Abraham did not hesitate to go with his 300 men, even though he was far outnumbered against these 4 kings, right? And even though he was up against 4 kings with only 300 men, he still split his forces, and yet he still wins the battle. And what does this show us? This shows us that Abraham wasn't, he didn't rescue Lot just by, strength of numbers, by some kind of physical advantage. But what we see in Genesis 18 was that, in Genesis 18, Lot gets in trouble again, right? And then Abraham's response is he prayed and interceded fervently for Lot. And I believe that he did the same here in this situation as well, which is really what enabled him to prevail even against such impossible odds. I was really just encouraged by this verse. I was really encouraged by this verse, 1 John 5:16. If anyone sees his brother sinning a sin not unto death, he shall ask, and he will give life to him, to those sinning not unto death. And so when we see our companions, our brothers and sisters in the Lord, our loved ones in a negative situation, first and foremost, we need to pray, right? We can pray life-giving prayers on these ones' behalf. But also, we need to go, right? We need to go to these ones, visit these ones, or maybe, make a phone call to these ones, care for them in such a practical way. But another thing that I kind of want to emphasize, though, is that I don't know about you, but when I read these kinds of stories, it's kind of easy for me to read under the assumption that I'm Abraham and Lot is someone else who's not me, and of course, we should all aspire to be today's Abrahams. But something important that a brother pointed out to me once is, Stephen, you can't just read the Bible like that. You could just as easily be Lot. And so this really emphasizes to us why we must not separate ourselves from God's people. We need to have companions, right? Ones who pursue the Lord, like James said, who call on the Lord out of a pure heart, right? And so we should read these stories not only assuming that we're just always going to be Abraham in all of our situations, but that we may also be Lot. And so that's why we need to stay close to the people of God. That's why we need companions. And I am really encouraged regarding this matter of companions by Ecclesiastes 4, 9 through 12. It says, 2 are better than 1 because they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, right? That could be any of us. The one will lift up his companion. But woe to the one who falls and does not have another to lift him up. And while a man may prevail against the one, the two will withstand him. And a threefold cord is not quickly broken. And so it's so wonderful if we can all have another companion, right? But what about even two companions with whom we can form this threefold cord, right? We can even pray to the Lord and ask him to raise up such companions for us and really give ourselves to seek out such ones. And so, when you go to, your brother, right? Those in your life who might be Lot, who might not be so on fire for the Lord, we really shouldn't assume that we're any better than they are, or that there's something, just wrong with them for being in the situation that they're in. And caring for these ones, it's great to read the word together with them, to maybe sing some songs together with them, but maybe what they need right now is not someone to come and whack them over the head with the Bible, right? Maybe what they need is just someone to come visit them, maybe to take them out for a meal, just to listen to them a little bit, and that will soften their hearts so that we can speak something from God to them. We should care for those around us in the same way that we would like to be cared for. And that leads us to the final major topic for today, which is this really mysterious matter. So in chapter 14, Abraham, he comes back from slaughtering the kings, right? And when he comes back, he's met by this mysterious person. And Melchizedek, the king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. Now he was priest of God the Most High, and Abram gave him a tenth of all. So we see this mysterious character, Melchizedek. Now, who is he? Who is this one? Well, an important theme that we've been exploring again and again throughout our series in Genesis has been that Christ is the main subject, not just of the New Testament, but of the entire Bible, including the book of Genesis. And in Genesis 14, we come to yet another instance, right, of Christ appearing in the book of Genesis. So what does Melchizedek minister to Abram? Bread and wine, right? Does that sound familiar? Well, the only other mentions of bread and wine in the entire Bible is in reference to the bread and wine ministered by Jesus to his disciples, which represents his blood and body, which he is ministering to us today. And there are some wonderful verses also from the book of Hebrews, which was most likely written by Paul. And these verses explain for us even more who Melchizedek is. Paul writes, "For this Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God," I won't read all this, "having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but likened to the Son of God, abides a priest perpetually." Right? We see that Melchizedek is such a one. We see so clearly from these verses that Christ is Melchizedek, right? And we see that Christ, he is, and so we see that Christ, he's the king of Salem, and he's the priest of the Most High God. And so what is he doing for God's people as such a priest today? Well, Hebrews 7:25 tells us that he, Christ, is able to save to the uttermost those who come forward to God through him, since he lives always to intercede for them, for us, right? And so we actually see, revisiting Abraham's defeat of the four kings, Abraham, he didn't win this fight by his natural strength, by strength of numbers, but he won this fight because Melchizedek was in the background, because Christ was in the background interceding for him. And so likewise for us, I don't know if any of you have had this experience before, but maybe you're caring for someone, maybe you're fighting on behalf of someone else, and it just seems hopeless, right? It just seems like no matter what you do, no matter what you try, nothing's working, nothing's getting through to this one. But I just want to encourage you not to give up, because it's not by our natural strength that we win these battles, right? So don't be discouraged when it seems like you're up against impossible odds, but just continue to depend on the intercession of our Melchizedek, right? Our Lord Jesus. In whether it's any sort of challenge that you face in life, but especially with respect to caring for those around you, to taking care of one another as companions, going on together in the Lord. What gives us the power to prevail? It's not our own natural strength, it's not our own efforts, but it's by the prayers and intercession of our high priest, Jesus Christ.